Want to start then?
Yes.
Hey, everyone. Michael asked me to open up the meeting. He's away. Said, by the way, this will be our last Zoom meeting for the year. But tonight we have a topic by Mike Amico, and the topic will be stepping into landscapes. And Mike will show us tips on photographing landscapes and also some gear selection, which will work with all cameras and lenses. So welcome everybody, and hope y'all have some happy holidays ahead. Right now, I'm going to turn it over to you, Mike. Are we going to be joined with someone from Hunts?
I don't think they're going to be coming on. They haven't gotten on yet. I know they mentioned to me they couldn't make it, so I thought they were going to come on initially to get it started, but they haven't so far. So I don't think we're going to see them.
Okay. Well, one request before we get started. Let's hold all our questions towards the end for Mike. That way he can smoothly go ahead and give us his take on landscapes. And also at the bottom of your monitor there's a little chat thing that you can click on chat and actually type in the questions either for everyone or someone specific. So if you have a question for Mike or anybody else, click on the chat and Mike will be able to see it. Otherwise, let's hold the questions to the end. And Mike, I'm going to turn it over to you for tonight's meeting.
Thank you, Tim. Yeah, usually with the chat, I have a hard time paying attention when I'm presenting. So usually at the end, I'll go right through it and see what you guys have. So go ahead and put any of your questions in there or hold on to them, and we'll definitely get to them after. But I'm going to go ahead and start my presentation so we can get going. You're going to see a little bit of an Olympus commercial in the beginning, and at the end, there's some settings and there's a couple of cool features from Olympus. And I do that because I am a representative of Olympus. So, but I'll try to book through for those of you that aren't Olympus shooters. And yes, 90% of the stuff is perfectly fine for any camera, and I'll translate some of it, like for instance, the lenses and things like that. So we're going to go ahead and get started. I'm going to share my screen here and show you guys my presentation. Thanks for coming, by the way. I'm going to stop my video too, so you don't have to look at me while I'm presenting here. So let's get started here. Give me a second. All right, you guys should be seeing my screen now. And all right, can you guys see that okay? Okay, so we're going to talk today about the
All we see is your face.
There we go. Now you see it, right?
There we go. Now we see it.
It was a little different. I had to hit that share button, so something was updated on Zoom. All right, we're going to talk today about the mirrorless landscape, or what I like to call stepping into landscape photography. And my goal today is to hopefully give you guys a little insight onto just some things to think about when you're doing landscape photography. It's something that I started doing just a few years ago. I took the job at Olympus in 2015. I was on the road a lot more and started to really get into the landscape a little bit more. So it's something I'm still learning as well. And so hopefully you get a little bit of inspiration, maybe some focal lengths to look at, things of that nature, and some tips and tricks and things like that. So let's go ahead and get into it here. So I'm Mike Amico with Olympus here, or OM Digital Solutions now as of January, still representing Olympus, and I've been in the industry for about 21 years now. So a lot of the changes, been with a few different companies, been with Olympus about 6 years. What I love about the cameras is the size of them, and it's not just the weight. Olympus is always small and lightweight. For me, I can handle the weight of other systems. I just like the size because they remind me of toys. And one of the things that Olympus does is computational features, kind of fun stuff. So I always carry them with me, and I'm always having fun with them. So that's what I enjoy about the cameras. So what is landscape photography? Landscape photography, sometimes we just think about, farms or open vast spaces, things of that nature. But really the reality is landscape photography, it really encompasses so much more. It could be the typical landscape, like I just mentioned. It could have animals in it. You could have people in a landscape. You can have cityscapes where you're shooting, the city, shooting different architecture and things of that nature. So there's so much to landscape photography, but traditionally we think of, some different images, someone like this, right? This is outside of Cooperstown, New York. So kind of like void of nature, void of all that stuff. But don't discount that stuff, because landscape is one of those photography genres that kind of encompasses a lot. So some of the notable landscape photographers, like Ansel Adams, of course, Galen Rowell, Edward Weston, Just some great landscape photographers out there to look at and to research and see what they've done. And they give you a lot of inspiration when you check out what they've done there. And I love this quote from Ansel Adams. It's so true. He says, there are always two people in every picture, the photographer and the viewer. And if you think about that, it's so true, because when we take a photograph as a photographer, we're trying to encompass what we see, right? We want to have our vision to bring that viewer into our photograph. And that's what you want to do every time you take a landscape. So we're going to talk about in the contents tonight, we're going to go through a little bit of a gear overview and the Olympus Advantage. So that's where you're going to have a little bit of a commercial with Olympus, and I'll try to book for those of you that don't shoot, but I want to excite you as well. I have 15 tips for landscape photography. So those 15 tips hopefully will give you that inspiration and some different ideas for your landscape. And then we'll talk about some settings, and also I'll show just a couple of Olympus features I love that you may actually have on your camera as well to get you started. So let's go through that. So what do we offer as Olympus? And this is where I'll do my commercial. Olympus is always going to be compact and powerful, right? With us, we do 4/3. So the sensor's a little smaller. What that allows us to do is keep the whole system smaller and lighter. And we could do things with the sensor that we could process it faster. So we could do a lot of cool stuff. But what I love to show in this image here is my buddy Kevin Laughlin from Wildside Nature Tours. We were at a birding festival a couple of years ago. He had a heart attack the year before, couldn't carry the weight anymore. And here he is holding the 300mm f4, which has a focal equivalence of the 600 next to it. And Kevin can hold that all day long, and he can shoot at a 4-foot telemacro. So telemacro capabilities and macro capabilities are great on the system. He also has another camera on the other side that you can't see, as well as his binoculars in his pocket. So he can walk around all day shooting that. The other gentleman has to be 15 feet away to get focus. So pretty cool. The weather resistance in the cameras is amazing. So when you're talking about landscape photography or anything like that, when you mate the right lenses with the right bodies, you could take it in the shower. It's that weather resistant. So we really have some great weather resistance. We rate a lot of our cameras at what we call a IPX1 rating. I'm trying to get that to work there. There we go. We like to rate them at IPX1. That's where you pay somebody to rate the camera. They drip water on it for 40 minutes. What we do is our own testing that goes beyond IPX1. We just can't, we can't say this is an IPX1. This is like way beyond IPX1. We spray water on the cameras. But the idea is that they go above and beyond that. We just like to put a rating on because nobody else in the industry is doing that right now. So definitely some water they go through, spraying water on there. You just can't dunk it, because then you're going to incorporate some pressure, and then where the lens meets the body, you will leak eventually. But pretty cool what they can do there. Another thing we have here is the 5-axis stabilizer. So Konica Minolta basically started that electronic stabilizer in the camera, and then we kind of came out with the 5-axis. So pitch, yaw, roll, vertical shift, horizontal shift. So as you move, the sensor is actually floating. There's a mechanism in there floating. And in the EM5 Mark III, we actually shrunk that mechanism down so it moves even more. So most of your cameras now in the industry have a 5-axis stabilization at this point. However, again, the smaller sensor, more compact mechanism, you can move it around a lot more in the body. So we're up to actually 8.5 stops of stabilization with our new 150-400 lens on the EM1X. Pretty cool. Nice thing is that you don't have to carry a tripod. And when you're doing landscape, it's cool to basically just take a hike and then take your camera out and enjoy your hike and then enjoy your shooting. Now, I still use a tripod for a lot of things. Some of the modes in the camera will cut the stabilization as well. So, but if I'm going out just taking a hike, it's nice to be able to shoot at, more than 1 second handheld. Pretty cool. Dust reduction system I like to mention because a lot of cameras don't have this, and we've had it since 2003, and we've made it 10% better in the last generation. You can change your lenses in a dusty environment without worrying about it. Basically, you turn the camera on and it shakes the sensor 30,000 times, knocks the dust off. So you don't have to worry about changing your lenses as much in a dusty environment. So a lot of times I'll see sensor cleanings and things like that, and you don't really see too many Olympus cameras in those sensor cleanings. So pretty cool stuff. All the cameras are amazing out there now. And the smaller companies like Olympus and Fuji and all that, we have to really innovate, right, to keep things rocking in the industry. So Olympus, if you don't know, created TTL flash. We created, or TTL metering, I should say, with flash. We created live view. So you have your DSLRs and everything now, and you have live view. That was us. We created the flip screen on the SLR. and many more things. So kind of cool. So let's talk about cameras. What gear do I need for landscape photography? And the cool thing is that you can shoot landscape with almost any camera. So like, for instance, in my line, I have a point and shoot tough camera, right? It has a 25 to 100 millimeter lens. I mean, that's a great range for shooting landscape. And then through my pen series and my OMD series, which are all interchangeable, and I'm sure most of us or all of us have now our interchangeable lens cameras, we probably have a point and shoot as well. So really just about any camera you have, you can take landscape with. And that's the great thing about it. Now, obviously, with our interchangeable cameras, we can add on any lens we want. So, now you have the ability to really change your vision. So let's talk about that a little bit. So these are some of the focal lengths that I love, some of the lenses I love in the Emswico Pro line. And you could translate this to your cameras easily. So let's talk about that. So the 7-14, that's my ultra wide angle. So you're talking like we're 2 times for a 35 millimeter effective focal length. So if you're shooting like a full frame camera, that would be like a 14 to 28. So you have a 14 to 28, maybe a 16 to 35, somewhere in that range, but it's that wide angle 2.8 lens. And what I love about that lens is, having that nice wide angle where you can get up on like a leaf on a rock with a waterfall behind it, something along those lines, and really bring in that whole breadth of what you're shooting. And most of the time I'll shoot it at the widest, of the wide angle there at 7 or 14 in full frame. Also what's cool about it is 2.8. At 2.8 or faster, I'm okay to shoot astrophotography with that. So not that we're talking about that. That is another somewhat type of landscape photography, right? And 2.8, you could bring in those stars nice and easy. We just came out a couple months ago with an 8 to 25, which is a great range. It would be like a 16 to 50 in a full frame. And so it's such a great range for like travel as well as landscape. These are all weatherproof as well. And that's an f4 straight through. So another great lens, having that nice wide angle. The 12 to 100 is my all-in-one pro zoom. And it's sharp from 12 to 100. It's a really great lens. It cannibalizes a lot of my system because it's so sharp. It's an f4 straight through, and it has image stabilizer on it. So you can get about 6.5 stops of stabilization with the right camera. Pretty cool. My standard lenses, 12 to 40. So if you have a 24 to 70 or a 28 to 70 in that range, so that's like your standard lens. Again, I have an f4. 12 to 45, and I have a 12 to 40 2.8. And again, the 2.8 is great because if I want to do starry sky, I can do that, as well as portraits, as well as go out and shoot my landscape. I have to say, you guys, like 12 millimeters, one of my favorites. So that'd be 24. I love that 24 range. It's just such an awesome wide angle for landscape. And we see, just so you know, and you guys probably know this, but we see at what, about 50, right? So they say like 35 to 50 is about normal for what we see when we're looking at a scene. So as you go wider than that, wider than like say 50 or even 35, you're just getting more and more, wide when you're showing that vast landscape. You're really throwing it out there. So pretty cool. But something you might not think about is actually using a telephoto for landscape. And it's something we don't think about sometimes. This is my 40 to 150 2.8 Pro. So that's like an 80 to 300. So if you're shooting, say, Nikon Z or a Sony, it'd be like a 70 to 200, right? These are great lenses for shooting landscape. And the reason is you really start to compress the background, right? When you're using these zoom lenses. So sometimes I'll go out with a buddy of mine, my buddy Todd up in upstate New York. He shoots a lot of landscape in the Adirondacks, and that's where I grew up in that area. And so when I go home to visit my parents or what have you, I'll go out with Todd, we'll go shooting, and he shoots Nikon. And sometimes he'll grab just his 7200. I'll grab my 40 to 150, and we'll just go out and shoot barns from the road. And, we'll drive around upstate New York, shoot some of the barns, and we'll just zoom right in from a distance, bring in that barn, bring in that background, the trees and everything. And it just compresses it. It gives you such a nice look. So don't discount some of your zoom lenses when you're out shooting landscape. Here's an example here. This image right here is a boathouse up in the Adirondacks. And it was fall. There was some color going on a couple years ago. This was actually shot with my 300 millimeter f4. So that's like a 600 millimeter equivalent in full frame. And that's something you might not think about when you're shooting landscape. You know, you're thinking that wide scene and all that, but I was across this pond and I really wanted to bring that boathouse in. And so by using that 600 millimeter focal length or that 300 f4, I was able to really bring that in. So again, don't discount bringing some of your longer lenses when you're out shooting. As far as compact lenses or primes, my again 12 is my favorite. So that's like a 24 millimeter. That 12 millimeter f2. I can do skies with it, and I can do landscape. 17-1/8. That would be like if you have a 35 millimeter on full frame. Now, this for me is my favorite normal lens. You can also have your 50 millimeter, or for me, it's 25. But I love that 35 millimeter range. I fell in love with it a few years ago. I just like how it's more like an environmental sort of a focal length. I feel like I could shoot anything from portraits to street to landscape with it. So I love that range. And that's one of my favorites. Now, when I shoot landscapes, I bring out the long lenses, I bring out the wide angles, but I also bring a couple of macros with me, or one of my macros, I should say. I usually bring my 60 because I'm out there and sometimes I'm shooting a nice landscape and there's maybe it's fall and there's some nice colored leaves on the ground, or maybe there's some mushrooms, you know, on the trees, and I want to capture that and I want to do some close-up detail. So it's always nice to have a couple of selections with you, right, when you're going out shooting. If you're specifically going out, you're shooting waterfalls or something along those lines, you're bringing filters, well, then you might want to only bring a couple of lenses, you know. But if you're going out and you're not sure, or you have a few things you want to shoot, make sure you bring a couple of lenses, you know, throw them in your car. So as far as accessories, what do we need for accessories? Well, one of the things you might want to look into is filters, and I'll talk a little bit more about them further into the presentation after the tips. But filters are a great thing to enhance some of your photos and help you with some of your photos in landscape. And again, we'll talk about that a little later. A tripod. I mentioned that we have this great 5-axis stabilization, and it's amazing, and it really is. And I have some customers, and most of my customers are 40 and older, trust me. And most of them don't want to use a tripod. They hate tripods. They refuse to use them. But I always have a good tripod, a solid tripod with me. I put a big one in my car. I have a medium-sized one I carry with me. And the reason why is that if I know I'm shooting something like, you know, waterfalls, or let's say, and I want to really slow that water down, some of the modes I have will cut the image stabilizer off. And some of them I just, you know, sometimes you just want to have that really stable, take my time, put the remote on the camera and just shoot that image. And so there nothing beats a steady, solid tripod when you're out shooting landscape. So definitely you want at least one nice little tripod. And if you only buy one tripod, my recommendation is to get a decent sized one. So don't just get a really small one. Maybe not a super giant one, but one that falls right in the middle. There's many good ones now. You can get some great prices on them. I have a few different ones, a few different brands, but the medium-sized ones are really solid now, and they're pretty reasonable. Nice little ball head. Definitely want one of those. And also a remote release. Now, most of your cameras nowadays, especially your mirrorless cameras, you're able to also use an app on your phone. With the Olympus, you can do that as well, where you can actually control your camera from your phone. The camera becomes a dummy, and you can change your settings on the phone and fire it off. I still love that traditional remote release, and I think it comes from school and the days of film, and just that tactile feel of a camera and having that remote trigger. But the phones work great. So, you know, remote releases are going to help you to keep your camera stable and steady, just like your tripod, for when you do like long exposure work and things of that nature. So remote releases are something you'll want to look into for landscape. All right, that said, let's go through my 15 tips for landscape photography. All right, you guys, this is a shot in Mentor, Ohio. This is actually near Lake Erie. So you're looking out towards Lake Erie. And this is an infrared shot. I have an old 2008 pen camera from Olympus. And I turned it into an infrared camera. It's like an old 12 megapixel camera. And I love how it just doesn't really render a ton of detail, you know, being an older 12 meg camera. And so with the black and white infrared, I just love the way that it renders. So it's a cool little shot, just getting down on the ground and shooting it wide at, again, 12 millimeter, so 24 millimeter for full frame. All right, tip number 1 is to learn photography basics. And you guys might laugh at a couple of these tips, but it's true. You really want to learn the exposure triangle. You want to learn the basics of photography and the rules of photography, such as the rule of thirds. You want to learn about those lens choices and how to see. You want to walk around with some of those lenses I talked about, and maybe just take one focal length, walk around, shoot with it, and see what you get, right? You become the zoom if you have a prime lens, or maybe you have a zoom and you tape the zoom at one focal length. It's a great way to study and to see what you can get with that focal length, and you start to learn which ones work for you and your vision. And so that's a great way to sorry, I just want to get my phone off there. I got my phone going off. It's a great way to learn, again, those focal lengths and what works for you. So learn some of the rules, learn the exposure triangle, the shutter speed, the aperture ISO. It's basic. Most of us know that, right? But a lot of us don't. A lot of us grab these cameras. We spend a lot of money. We put the camera in auto. We want the camera to do everything. And I know that the mirrorless cameras, especially, they're like computers. I mean, that's what they are. They are computers. And so it's a little frustrating sometimes, especially when you put it down for a month and you pick it up. But learn this stuff. Nothing beats knowing photography. Again, the cameras today, you can do amazing ISOs. You can do all this stuff, but we still paint with light. We're still photographers. And to understand what you have, you understand that exposure triangle helps to, really, really make it work better. So here's number 2. And number 2, this shot here was, again, with that 300 millimeter f4. So this is another one of those shots where I really compressed that background and zoomed in from the other side of the pond here. Learn everything you can about your camera. Sort of goes with tip number 1. Again, the cameras are computers, right? They have amazing capabilities. You almost can't buy a bad camera today. I mean, they're just fantastic. And 90% of the cameras today will do 90% of the stuff we need. But we love technology. So we're always buying more, but we don't learn everything in our cameras. So learn your camera, play with it, get to use some of the features that you think will work for you. When your camera becomes an extension of your hand, there's nothing like that when you're taking a landscape, and you can change these settings without having to worry about your camera. You're just one with that that scene, right? And you're taking that image and doing what you want. So play with your camera and learn everything you can about it. So this is a shot just to give you guys an idea of what I just showed here. That was the 300. See that little boathouse, little yellow boathouse? That's a 300 millimeter. So that's 600 millimeter equivalent with full frame. And that is at about 100 millimeters. So it gives you the idea of how different. 100 would be 200 in full frame. So 200 millimeter versus 600 millimeter. It's amazing how different those focal lengths are and how much more you get in the scene. That was the same day, same everything. But when you really crop in, you zoom in on that boathouse, you have that reflection going, the water looks pretty calm. And then as you zoom out there, you really start to see how the water's got more movement in it, got more color around the boathouse. So pretty interesting how the focal lengths can change there. Number 3, and this is in Colorado, and you could take this with any camera, including a phone, and get that because it's unbelievably breathtaking. It's amazing there. It really is. We had a training there, and we got to go around and shoot this, and it was just unbelievable in the national park. So number 3 is to maximize the use of your depth of field. So depth of field, that's your what's in focus, right? And basically, you kind of have to know what you're going for. Do you want to keep the overall image in focus? Like this shot here was shot probably f8 to f11. I shot this. So everything's in focus from the front to the back. Do you want to do that? Or do you maybe want to focus on an object in front of you? Maybe you have, again, that example of a leaf on a rock and a waterfall behind it. And you want the waterfall out of focus and you want the leaf in focus. So maybe you use like a f2.8 to f4 and you focus on that. So there's different ways to take these images, different ways to make it work. And you just have to figure out what you want to do with your image. And then from there, you just accordingly set your aperture. So how about focus stacking? Now, focus stacking is something we'll talk about a little bit after the tips. And it's something that would be a great tool for landscape. A lot of people think about macro with focus stacking, and I'll tell you what it is in a little while, but it's actually pretty good for landscape as well. This image is near me. I'm in Ohio. I'm near Cleveland. I'm actually in the Akron area, and there's a national park behind me, Cuyahoga Valley National Park. And this is Blue Hen Falls. It's literally a quarter mile from the road. Of course, with COVID, it's like 4 miles. You got to hike now because you have to park somewhere else. But it's a beautiful little waterfall, and I love getting down really low with my tripod and just taking that image, taking a nice longer exposure, getting that water, just sort of running over the slate and everything. Really cool. And I used a different mode in this called Live ND mode, and I'll tell you what that is later too. But use a tripod when needed. And in this example here, again, I was low. I was just about in the water, had my tripod in the water. Carbon fiber tripod isn't going to rust, so you can stick it right in the water, not have to worry about it as much. But there are situations where a tripod is absolutely needed. And just remember to turn your image stabilizer off when you're using a tripod. Now, do you have to do that? And what if you forget? Most of your actually all your manufacturers are going to tell you to turn your stabilizer off when you're on a tripod. Some of my visionaries will tell you, don't worry about it. And I'll actually say, you kind of don't have to worry about it. The stabilization system is so good now in the cameras that I haven't had much of an issue, but the reasoning for turning the stabilizer off, just so you have an idea, is that you could get a blurry image. And the reason for that is your image stabilizer systems in the cameras are looking for movement. So if you're on a tripod, the stabilization system is still looking for movement. So there's a chance that you can get a little bit of movement in the system while you're shooting the picture. So I haven't had it happen much. I did have it happen a couple months ago. I was shooting an image on Lake Erie, and I did get some images that were just a tad out of focus. And I know that I was in focus. I know, it's one of those things where I'm looking at them going, what happened? But I'm pretty sure it's because I had the stabilizer on. I had forgot to turn it off. So I always mention to turn it off. There's a lot of times we forget now. A lot of the modes in the cameras, including mine, will automatically shut it off. So you don't really have to worry as much. But if you're thinking about it, just, flick it off. Number 5, this was in Mexico, but look for a more interesting angle or view of the scene. This one here, I went out in the morning, sun was coming up, beautiful scene, but not much there. And I thought this woman sort of, kind of made the scene, little tourist, taking an image with her phone. So sometimes the most interesting view can be right behind us. Maybe the lights fall on a different angle on your subject. Maybe if you take a step back and take a look in the scene, you might, just enjoy yourself, enjoy your surroundings, and then capture it. Maybe you're on a photo workshop and there's, 15 people shooting the same thing. Maybe you step back and shoot everybody shooting the scene, or turn around and see what's behind you. You'd be pretty amazed sometimes at what you can find when everybody's focused on something else. So look for something a little more interesting. Look for a different angle or a different view. This is Niagara Falls on the United States side, the American side. And it's one of the only photographs where I had to use Photoshop and get rid of a person. I don't really use Photoshop a lot, but you can see all the people down at the bottom rail. And it's a long exposure. It's about a 20-second exposure. So you got the clouds moving, a little bit of water movement on the left. But over on the right, there's a little walkway coming into the scene. And there was a guy standing there on his cell phone. And because of the angle, he looked like a giant. It was really, really interesting. It was just the way that the angle was. And I had to get rid of him. It just made the picture awful. But I like the way the image looks otherwise. So this was with my 12 to 100. Again, I believe I was at 12 millimeters on this, so 24 millimeter. So capture movement within the scene. When you're doing landscape photos, you have water, you have clouds, all that fun stuff. Try to capture some of that flowing water. If you have moving clouds, try to convey that in the final image. And I'll show you a way to do that. I'll show you what you can use for that after these tips. So you want to use some filters depending on the day, the time of day. Number 7, this is 7th Lake in the Adirondacks in New York. And number 7 is to look for reflections. Now, this is like your traditional reflections, right? We think of a dock like this. We think of, water and all this stuff, but don't discount things like puddles. If you're shooting a barn scene, you might have a puddle or a pond in the front. Reflections off of windows, reflections off of cars, different vehicles. Anytime you're shooting, if you look for reflections, one of my pro shooters, Frank Smith out of Pennsylvania, he's got some just amazing stuff, and he loves looking for reflections, and he finds them everywhere. He's like a master of reflections. I've seen him in all kinds of his images, and he's amazing at that and landscape, and he kind of mixes those together. But look for reflections. Sometimes it really can make the image pretty interesting. So definitely can enhance your landscape for sure. This, by the way, was the same image or same place. This was about an hour before. So it just kind of gives you an idea of the different color that you might see. So again, this was maybe an hour later. This is like, say, I don't know, 9 o'clock in the morning. And this was like 7 o'clock in the morning, and it was just a little bit lower on the dock, a little more fog. So it's pretty interesting how a different angle, getting a little bit lower on the dock, a little bit closer to the front, how it changes the whole makeup of the scene. Now this was a year before, and same scene again, same lake, same everything, but now you have no fog going on. You have more of a cloudy, gloomy day and a little bit more of a reflection on the water, a little more glassy. So it's kind of interesting how those three images of the same scene look completely different. So go back to some of these places. I have a really favorite place I go to. It's a farm off of, it's hard to shoot because it's off a highway, but it's in between Cincinnati and Columbus, Ohio. And there's this little farm, and it's got this little cool tree in the middle of the farm, and it's like this lone tree. And I love going there different times of the year and shooting this thing with leaves, without leaves, fall color, wintertime. So go back to some of these places. Find some of your favorite places. This is that 7-14 lens. So again, 14 millimeters on full frame. But number 8 is can't talk again. Utilizing the rule of thirds. I think I've had too much coffee today. I'm on probably my 4th cup. So it's starting to have the opposite effect. So the rule of thirds is going to help you compose a scene that brings the viewer into your image. And this is kind of an elementary sort of a shot right here, but it gives you an idea of how that works. And so I'm bringing the viewer in by utilizing, this wood right here. It just kind of comes right in. And the idea of the rule of thirds is that you break up that image into thirds, and where you have these cross sections in the center there is where you kind of want to keep your subjects in the photo. Typically, you might want to use the different thirds to kind of change where you have your, let's say, your horizon line or your different subjects. So in this case, the top third, pretty much, I didn't have the grid, but the sky is on sort of the top third, the horizon, right? It's not right in the center. It's sort of up towards the top. And then you have the log bringing the viewer into the scene. So it's kind of elementary because it's bringing somebody in, but look for some of that stuff. Look for different trees and limbs and logs, and maybe bring that horizon up or down, and just sort of change it a little bit instead of centering everything. And it just makes it a much more pleasing image to the eye. So play with that a little bit. Start using that rule of thirds. With landscape, it works really well. And again, after a while, you start to see it without even realizing that you're seeing it. And you start to know, what, I'm going to center this one. It's okay to break the rules. It's okay to center stuff, but you want to learn them first and play with them and learn them and then break them. This is the kind of stuff I love shooting. Just these old barns on the side of the road that have a lot of clutter. I love that. So find an interesting subject. Find something that calls to you, something that you enjoy. I love old cars, old tractors, old farms. I love these gloomy days like this in the fall, going into the winter or early winter when there's no leaves on the trees. Find what you love and photograph it. What happens is you find that your pictures come out better because you have a connection to what you're photographing. And so definitely photograph what you love. Find an interesting subject and shoot it. And if you notice, most of my images that I'm showing are with, like a 12-100 or a 7-14. So I am using those wider lenses a lot more, and then I am zooming in on a few of them. So, but again, my favorite focal length is probably 12 in my line for landscape, which is 24 in that range. And that's just me. You might find something completely different that works for you. I just like seeing things a little wider. This is another one where I pretty much, again, just using that tree to just bring you into the scene, into that little waterfall there. Believe it or not, this is Indiana. This is outside of Indianapolis, about an hour. It's a place called Turkey Run State Park. And it's kind of cool. It's like right where the glacier sort of ended there. And you have this really interesting, like prehistoric looking area that you can go down in. And it's literally flat farmland. And then all of a sudden, boom, the earth just stops and you go down in. It's really, really neat. Use the leading lines. And again, this tree kind of bringing you in. And what are leading lines? Basically leading lines are vertical, horizontal, or diagonal lines, and they attract a viewer's attention and pretty much lead you right into that critical area. So in this case, again, it's kind of right in your face, but I'm learning, and we all learn, and eventually we do this a little less subtly. But this tree kind of brings you into the center there where I have this water going on. So it's a great tool to kind of show more depth and bring that viewer deeper into the scene. So leading lines. Number 11 is to add people to the landscape. Now, this is a shot with the 7-14 again. So again, a 14 millimeter equivalent. So really wide. And I love shooting people wide. And I know that's kind of a no-no, right? Because you start to stretch people and they look kind of weird. But I put my younger daughter right in the middle here. And by putting her in the middle, she's not as stretched, but I can reach out and touch her. That's how close she is to the lens. It's such a wide angle lens. But this is Green Lakes State Park up near Syracuse, New York. And it's these two lakes that are just crystal clear. You can see right through them. They're prehistoric lakes. They're really amazing. And so by adding people, sometimes you give yourself a little bit different of a view in the scene. Sometimes it just kind of makes or breaks the image. So I love adding people to the landscape. I don't know if you'd consider this a self-portrait or if you'd consider it a landscape, but add yourself to the landscape. Sometimes we're out and we're shooting by ourselves, especially with COVID. Photography is great, and photography has become a new hobby for a lot of people with COVID. And the cool thing about it is you can do it alone. And so sometimes when you're doing landscapes and stuff, throw yourself in there. Now, this one is kind of interesting because I was just driving to go get my kids. They're in the panhandle of Texas, and I had the camera up behind me, and I was just kind of firing as I was driving. I know I shouldn't have done that, but I did. There was actually lightning going on. I was trying to capture that, which didn't happen. But really, when I typically take pictures of myself in the landscape, they look more like this. I'll use a timer or I'll use a remote. And sometimes I'll use a wide angle lens. Again, this is that 7-14. I'm usually shooting that right at the 7 millimeter point. So 14 millimeters in 35 or full frame. This is outside of Las Vegas, but that's more where you see me, the whole person. But use yourself, put yourself in the landscape. You're doing like a waterfall, throw yourself in there, wear a red jacket, jump in front of the waterfall, wear bright colors sometimes, or bring a bright hat or something like that. For one, it's kind of cool to have that documentation of yourself, in these locations. Even if you don't like shooting yourself, photographing yourself, I should say, it's nice to have a documentation, but it's kind of cool to look back on it after. You go, that's kind of neat. I was at this place and here I am, and it was 20 years ago, or whatever. Like for instance, I have a gray beard now mostly. Look at that. It's black. But yeah, put yourself in the landscape. It's fun. This was, again, another shot like that infrared one, same area. This is Mentor, Ohio, off of Lake Erie. And they have this really cool, like, seagrass. It's actually not found in a lot of places anymore. And so this was actually, I had come back home from Florida. When COVID started, I was in Cape Coral for 3 months with my sister. So I come back home to Ohio, and I decide, you know what, I'm going to go over to the beach and get a sunset. And I come over here, and there's like just 1,000 people. People everywhere. And I'm trying to move around with the camera, and people just wanted, at the time, it was the beginning, and people wanted to get out. And so there was photographers shooting engagements, wedding parties. There was senior portraits going on. There's swimmers coming out. So I wanted to get away from everybody. So the sun hadn't set yet. It was the golden hour, got a little bit of golden light there. And what I did here is I got really low. So I got in this trail here, took my tripod, put the legs down nice and low, and took this image. I also have a self-portrait of me in there. But the cool thing is you don't see any of the other people. You don't see any other photographers. It almost looks like a really lonely area, right? It looks like there's nobody there. It just changed the whole makeup of the area Meanwhile, there's 100 people all around me. So get low sometimes. For that matter, get high. One of the things I find is when I do sunset photo walks with some customers, I find that the first thing that people do when we set up on the beach for a sunset shoot, let's say we're shooting lighthouses, the first thing they do is they grab their tripod and they take the legs and they put them all the way down and they have the camera up to their eye. Just immediately. It's like an instinct for all of us. We've all done it, and there's nothing wrong with that. But sometimes, a lot of our cameras now, you can flip a screen out, right? Or you can flip the screen up 90 degrees or 45. So maybe try going a little higher, or maybe even take that tripod down a little bit lower, down towards the ground, maybe dog's eye view. And it's amazing how different that makes the scene when you're shooting, like, say, for instance, a sunset. So try that. Definitely try different angles when you're out there shooting. Number 14 is to just wait. And this shot here was actually, this is in Pine Island, Florida. So my sister is in Cape Coral. I go to Pine Island and grab a quick sunset sometimes. There's this little area where if it's not flooded, if the tide's not high, you can actually put a kayak out there. It's kind of muddy. You can go out there and shoot a little bit. So I had two cameras with me. I had a camera with that 7-14, all the way wide on the tripod. And then I was hand holding the 12-100 with another camera. So that's what this is. So I'm out at 100 millimeters. So 200 millimeters with a full frame. So I'm out, pretty far, and I'm photographing these pelicans going by, and the sunset wasn't that great. It kind of fizzled out this night. So you had the orange, and a little bit of the blue hour after. But as the pelicans are going by, I thought it'd be kind of cool to capture one, again, sort of right in the middle, which, you can put things in the middle sometimes, but I thought he kind of made the image, made it kind of cool. So sometimes when you wait, the right shot just kind of presents itself, right? So I kind of liked this image. I don't know if you can really tell because it's probably small, but behind this pelican towards the line, the ridge line there, there's a little dot coming up out of the water, and we didn't know if it was a shark or a dolphin. It actually ended up being like a dolphin. But off to the right of this pelican, there was a kayaker coming in, and he was coming in kind of quick. He wasn't sure what it was either, and then he figured out it was a dolphin, and he came in. But this kayaker was coming in, and I figured, I'm going to shoot him as he gets closer with that other camera, with that 7-14. So just to give you an idea, again, how different the focal lengths are. This was at 100 millimeters or a 200 millimeter 35 equivalent. And this is at 14, or in my system, it's 7 millimeters. So this is the wide angle. You could see how far out that tree line is, right? I mean, look how different it is at a wide angle like that compared to a 200 millimeter. Just amazing how different that is. And again, this guy right here in the kayak, I could just about reach out and touch him. He was probably like 5 feet from me, but it's just how wide that focal length is. So play around with those different focal lengths. Just amazing how different the color is and what you can get just coming out or zooming in. And my last tip for you guys, number 15, it might sound kind of obvious or you might kind of laugh at it, but as we get older, especially, I think it holds really true. And it's research the area, learn where you're going and let somebody know you're going out there. That's kind of the one where I said you might laugh, but it's so true. What are the best times to shoot? This is actually Manistee, Michigan. Michigan on Lake Michigan has some just amazing lighthouses all the way down the west coast there. And this is a cool little place, nice little lighthouse. And, you research, maybe there's a tourist time, time when tourists are there all the time. Maybe there's great sunsets there. Maybe the sunrise is amazing there. Just research the area to see what the best times are. Photo Pills is a great app to have on your phone. It actually, you can see where the sun's going to be. You can kind of determine your focal length with that app. So Photo Pills is a really good app, but learn the area you're going to, definitely check it out. Now, letting somebody know you're heading out, super important. I have trails near me all over the place. National Park. I got all kinds of metro parks. A couple of years ago, there was a guy jogging, older guy was jogging and he fell off. We were talking about erosion earlier. This guy fell off a side of a cliff that was eroding and fell down onto a rock and broke his hip. And where he fell was up underneath this ledge. Nobody could see him. Nobody could hear him. And 3 days later, a kayaker found him, and thankfully, and he was okay. But the idea is that, we have everything from social media to our cell phones. Just let somebody know, hey, I'm going out and shooting at such and such this weekend, or I'm heading out. If you're alone, make sure you let somebody know where you're going, because you just never know. You never know what could happen. You get hurt and you're out there, and definitely you want to be able to enjoy yourself. So, all right. So really quick, I want to go through some tips with you guys, some settings, talk about filters a little bit. And I do have a couple of Olympus features that are pretty cool that I want to tell you about in case you are an Olympus shooter. Filters. I mentioned filters in the beginning. Now, I don't use a ton. I'd like to use more, but I have a few. And I use a system like you see here, where the filter goes on the front of the lens, and I can use it with multiple lenses because it's a sort of a drop-in filter system. You also have filters that you can screw into the front of your lens. There's nothing wrong with either system. The reason I went with a system like this, a square filter kit, is, again, I can buy the filter for the mount for the largest lens I'm going to use for landscape, and then I can use step down rings to make it fit all my other lenses as they go down in the system. So filters are expensive. And by using a system like this, you spend a little bit more money up front, but it saves you money, I think, in the long run, because you can use it with multiple lenses. So there's a couple of filters I would recommend right off the bat. And that's what I have. And one is a polarizer. And most of us probably have a polarizer. It's usually the first filter you buy. If you buy a UV, that might be the first one, or I should say a protection filter. Otherwise, a polarizer. Polarizer is it just enhances your colors. It darkens your skies. It cuts down on glare. It gets rid of a little bit of haze. It's really a great, almost must-have filter for fall colors, because it really gives you those nice saturated colors. It helps out with that. So a polarizer is typically the first filter we buy as photographers. And a circular polarizer, you basically turn the front element of it, and you can actually see the effect taking place. So polarizer is definitely something to look into. The next thing is an ND filter, or a neutral density filter. And you guys have probably heard somebody say neutral density, or ND. And all it is an ND filter is what you see in this picture right here. It's just a dark filter. And the reason for that filter, what that does is it cuts light. It stops light from coming in your camera as much. So I have personally a 6-stop and a 10-stop. And then I have what's called a graduated ND. And those are my 3 ND filters. Now, as you get more stops, like a 6, a 10, a 32, whatever, and you can combine them, you're just darkening it more and more. A graduated is dark on the top, let's say, or the bottom. It's dark on one side, and then it actually gets clear as you go down. So the reason for these filters, the easiest way to understand them is if you think about something like I'll throw in a waterfall, because we all think of neutral density with waterfalls. If I go shoot a waterfall and I want to do a longer exposure and get a nice creamy image of the water, like have it nice and creamy, if it's the middle of the day, if it's 11 o'clock in the morning or 1 o'clock in the afternoon and there's too much light, I can't do like a 1 second exposure, or even a 1/10 of a second exposure, or a 30-second. I mean, whatever I want to do, because there's too much light. It doesn't matter if I'm at 100 ISO, if I'm at f22, there's just too much light coming in. So by using these neutral density filters, I can take that light down and go ahead and open up my exposure. Now, that's the great thing to remember, is that if you're shooting a waterfall and you're in an area where it's a little bit darker, or it's earlier in the day or later at night, you don't need a filter. You can open it right up. But this helps to allow you to open that up, almost any time of the day. Also, when you want cloud movement, you're talking about clouds moving and things like that. This is where, a filter, again, it allows you to, I'm shooting a lighthouse, there's water and there's clouds moving. It's maybe, getting later in the afternoon, but still pretty bright. I want a 20-second exposure. Boom, I put a neutral density filter on and I'm able to do that. The graduated, or it's dark and light, I'll use that at times where maybe, again, let's say I'm shooting a sunset with a lighthouse. I want some movement. I want the water to be smoothed out. I want the clouds to move a little bit. So by putting a graduated on, I might have the darker area of the filter where the sky is, And then where the horizon meets the water is where there's nothing on the filter. It's just clear. So that if I have a longer exposure, I'm getting more light onto those dark areas of the water and the beach, and the sky doesn't blow out. So just, different ways to use them. But those are the filters I recommend for sure for starting out. Are look into ND filters or neutral density, and look into polarizers. There's some great sets out there. I use Benro. There's the Nisi filters. There's the Lee filter system. There's a whole bunch of different filter systems that are really good. So art filters, that's another one. Now, some of your cameras have art filters. The Olympus cameras, I think, were one of the first to do it. A lot of people laugh at art filters. Basically what they are, and I'll go through some of them here. Basically, they're just different filters in the camera that do things that you can do, let's say, in apps or in Lightroom after. Diorama, dramatic tone, which is zombie for people, but gives you really dramatic skies. Keyline, it's almost like watercolor. And there's watercolor. Art frame effect with that, soft focus effect. They're just different filters that you could do in the camera, so you can nail it in the camera. Now, they are just JPEG in the camera, but you can shoot JPEG and RAW. And that way you can have a RAW copy and you can have your JPEG copy. And the cool thing is you can see these filters with a mirrorless camera. You can see them as you're shooting. So like black and white, you can see it as you're shooting, and you can compose with these filters. Now, the cool thing is you can add them later too, just like you would in Photoshop. Our actual software, Olympus Workstation, allows you to add them later. So this is a shot of Racket Lake up in upstate New York in the Adirondacks. It was kind of a gloomy day, and I added a blue filter and I added a pop color art filter. There you go. Just kind of changes the makeup of that image a little bit, right? It's kind of cool. So don't discount some of these different types of filters in your cameras. A lot of the mirrorless cameras now will do this stuff, and it's kind of fun. It's kind of fun to play with this stuff in camera and get it done, or in some of the software that we have. Now, here's an example of a shot with no filters. I didn't take this one. This is somebody else that took this. It's an older shot, but it's kind of cool. This is just a 2/50th of a second at f/5.6 ISO 100, no filters. Now, what if you were to add a neutral density filter and do more of like a 60-second exposure? There you go. That's a really dark neutral density filter. That's 60 seconds. And you get a lot more detail in here in the trees. The water looks more like glass. The sky's moving a little bit. So I'll go back. Pretty cool. So pretty amazing. Now, what if on top of this, I added one of those art filters like dramatic tone that everybody makes fun of? Kind of cool, right? So now there's your 20-second exposure, dramatic tone, and a neutral density filter. So don't discount some of these different tools we have in these cameras. They're really, really fantastic. I want to talk about focusing a little bit. So if you're going to focus in landscape photography and use autofocus, single point focusing is going to be the best. You don't always want to focus in the very center. You might want to focus a third into the photo, and that oftentimes gives you a little more of a precise focus, but you definitely don't want to use multiple points. And so if you're using auto or program, especially if you're a program where you could change things, take the focus points down to one. And the reason for that is that multiple points are used for things like sports, wildlife, nature, that they're used to cover more ground and capture more of the scene of what you're, like a moving subject. With landscape, if I use like 25 points here and I have a branch or something coming into the scene, it's going to grab whatever's the closest to one of those points. It might be a branch. I'm going to be out of focus for the rest of my scene. So try to use like a single point when you're doing landscape photography and you're doing autofocus. I use manual focus a lot for landscape. And what I use is a tool called focus peaking. And I would say all the cameras at this point have focus peaking, at least all the mirrorless cameras from all the manufacturers. This started with, I believe, Sony. It might have been Panasonic, but I think it was Sony. Started with their camcorders back around 2012 or so with their video cameras. And what it does is it gives you a color. I use red a lot. It doesn't work if there's red trees, but you can use, in my cameras, there's black and white, there's red, there's yellow. And basically what it does is where you have the red show up, like for instance, in this image here as an example, where the keys are red, that's what's in focus. So if I'm shooting a landscape at f11, let's say, and I turn my manual focus ring, and all of a sudden the tree line lights up red, I know I'm in focus. So it's a really cool way to know you're in focus. And if you're adapting lenses, older lenses like manual focus lenses, onto your mirrorless cameras, you can make focus peaking be one of your function buttons, and you can use this tool for any lens. So it's kind of cool. It's a nice, back in the days of film, we had like, you'd go to focus, you'd have a little meter go on, green light would go on when you were in focus, or, maybe you had like I think my camera had like a little circle, and it would get like, it'd be blurry, and then it would kind of come into focus. This is a great tool to tell us that we're in focus. Pretty neat. If you're an Olympus user, it's under manual focus assist. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because I don't have a lot of Olympus shooters. I want to make sure everybody gets something here. So I told you I'd talk quickly about focus stacking and bracketing. Now, some of my cameras will actually do stacking in the camera. They will do bracketing in most of my cameras, and some other manufacturers are doing this as well. So focus stacking and bracketing is a tool that a lot of photographers use. I'm showing a macro image here because it's the easiest way to explain how it works. But what photographers found is that if they take images, like let's say you have again, I'll use that example of a little leaf, a fall color red leaf on a Brock in front of me, and there's a waterfall farther away behind me. There's no physical way I can get both in focus. It just isn't going to happen. It's just the way the field is, the view is. But if I take different shots at different focus points throughout that range of where the leaf is all the way to the waterfall, and then I use a software to combine those photos and composite them together, I have an image where everything's in focus. So focus stacking, that's what focus stacking is when you put it together. Bracketing is when you bracket those shots. Now, my cameras will do it in the camera, which is kind of cool. It uses the image stabilizer system to move the sensor and actually focus in the camera. So most people will do it with macro, like this shot here. You're so close to an image or a subject like a flower that you might grab just a little piece of a petal and throw everything out of focus. But if you focus different areas throughout the flower, you'll get just much more of that flower in focus and throw the background right out. It's more three-dimensional. It's pretty cool. And you could do it in the cameras. And again, I'm not going to go through this because I don't know how many Olympus shooters I have. But it's specific lenses will work with focus stacking, and bracketing pretty much works with just about all the lenses in my system. That shot, by the way, you guys, that was in Florida last year with COVID. That was my 300 millimeter f4 in telemacro. Just happened to catch that little hoverfly. It's kind of cool. This is another example of focus stacking and bracketing. So the image on the left is a single frame from where maybe just one piece of one of those crayons is in focus. And on the right, you have the final merged image. And you can see where, I mean, just the angle of those crayons, you would never get all that in focus. But by using the multiple images and putting it together, it works really well. So it's something that with landscape, I don't think a lot of people really think about it, but it's a pretty amazing tool. This is an Olympus feature, Live ND. I just wanted to show you these really quick. We talked about neutral density filters, and I talked about how I have a smaller sensor in my camera, so I can process it a lot faster, kind of like your phone, right? So Live ND actually uses a ND, it gives you an ND effect by using multiple exposures in the camera. So you can get the effect from ND2 to ND32, where you can do, like you see the waterfall on the left here. I can get that effect in the camera without a filter. It's pretty cool. This is a shot I took using live neutral density. It gives me that effect of the, what the neutral density filter would do. I could take, my shutter speed down, and it just gives me that nice effect. It's pretty cool. Another thing I have, and a lot of your cameras are starting to do this now, is a lot of the cameras have a high resolution mode, which is pretty cool. It allows us to shoot multiple images on our cameras. I know the Fuji medium format, you can get like a 400 megapixel image. I mean, it's crazy. We could do all this stuff. The Sony's. So we were one of the first to do it. I have a 20 meg sensor, so I can get like a 50 megapixel image. I can get an 80 megapixel RAW at this point on my EM1 Mark III. And basically the camera on a tripod takes 8 images, stitches them all together, and gives you a nice high-res image. It's great for landscape because if you have a moving subject like a person, it's not going to work as well. you're a little bit limited. But with landscape, it works great. And if there's water flowing, you're going to get that movement in the water. So it's pretty cool. But even cooler than that is that with the processing getting faster and faster on a couple of our cameras, and this is where you can see where it puts the images together. On a couple of our cameras, we have now handheld high resolution. So if I jump out of the car, take a picture of a barn, I could put it in handheld high res. The camera takes 16 images, puts them all together, uses a stabilizer to compensate for the movement in between each shot, stitches them together in about 2 or 3 seconds, and I have an 80 megapixel file, just like that. Now, the cool thing about that is that if I want to go shoot the Cleveland Air Show and take 3,000 images at 20 megapixel, I can I can do that and open up the files. And then if I want to take a few landscape shots at 80 megapixel, I can open the files. So it's nice to kind of have the best of both worlds, sort of have a lower res, higher res. So that's my presentation, you guys. I didn't want to keep you too long. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this and come back on. All right. So we can maybe answer some questions here. All right. Thanks for joining, by the way. I appreciate it, you guys. And any questions, let me know. I'm just going to go through the chat really quick and start with that to see if there's any kind of questions. How often do I use a polarizer with landscape photography? It sort of depends. I mean, I use one when I'm shooting the fall colors. That's definitely a great time to use it because, again, you're enhancing the colors of the leaves on the trees. You're darkening that sky and really helping out with those reflections in the water and things like that. But a polarizer can be used, all the time. It's not just fall. I mean, I walk around sometimes with a polarizer, so I would play with it and see when it works the best for you. But with landscape, it's good a lot of times. So my favorite aperture for landscape. So yeah, depending on what you're shooting, Tim, if you're shooting a full frame camera, I would say probably, f8, f11, f16. For me, with the 4/3 camera, it's f8. I'm around f8, f7, f8, because the depth of field's a little different with a smaller sensor. So around f7.1, f8, sometimes f11 is where I go with that. Okay, that's it for the ones on the chat. So if anybody else has questions, let me know. Yeah, it's a little different with the 4/3 because you're and it's confusing to a lot of people now because let's say, for instance, I have an f4 lens. It's a lot of people will say, well, it's an f8, because you have a 2 times on the focal length. It isn't. It's somewhere around there, depth of field wise, and but your light is still f4 on the system, and that's where it gets confusing because it's a different format. But so when I'm doing let's say I'm shooting birds, I can shoot them at 5.6 all day long or f4 and have some nice depth of field. So all your systems have benefits and negatives, and some of the negatives are benefits on some systems and vice versa. So another tool, but I'm around 7.1 to f11 is where I shoot a lot. So yeah, no, I appreciate you guys coming on and listening to the presentation. I think that's it, Tim. I don't think I have any more questions coming on.
All right. Anybody else have any questions for Mike? I mean, if you do, open up your microphone and you can speak to him directly.
Yeah, the key is, you guys, I just want to make sure you get a little bit of inspiration and maybe some tips, where you can go out there and shoot a little bit and think about some of this stuff. Think about bringing that viewer. Yep.
Mike,
Hey,
what are the difference in your apertures in between the wide angle and the telephoto? With the wide angle, do you tend to go with the lower?
I'll be honest. No, for me, I'm almost always at like f8 in that area. It's and again, I'm still
there, huh?
Yeah, it's weird. Like
Yeah.
with my landscapes, it's just I'm a very boring shooter sometimes. I love when everything's in focus with that kind of shooting. So even if I shoot like night scenes, like if I'm shooting a city at night, believe it or not, I'm at like f8 and I just do a longer exposure. I just love being that's kind of like my sweet spot for a lot of my shooting, unless I'm doing portraits or birds or things like that. But landscape, I find that I'm pretty much there at around f8.
How sensitive are you to ISO when you shoot in landscapes? I know everybody tries to shoot at base ISO if you can.
Yeah, and for the Olympus cameras, the native ISO is 200 to 6400, and most of the time I'm shooting at 200. That's just, and that's with landscape. I mean, with birds, obviously, and things like that, it's all over the place. But with landscape, I try to keep it at the lower ISO.
especially with a
And
tripod.
yeah, especially with a tripod. And like I said, I mean, I'll go with a longer exposure before I'll change that. I think it's just a habit. I'll go out and shoot, and I'll keep it at the low ISO. And landscape's one of those things where I want to keep it. I keep my settings sort of similar, right? I want to keep everything mostly in focus the way I shoot. I want to, keep the ISO down, do some longer exposures, things of that nature. So that's pretty much where I'm at. Now my cameras will also boost. A lot of the cameras will now. Where I say boost, you can go down to like 64 ISO on my camera, or 100 ISO on some of the cameras, but 200 is the native ISO. So when I say boost, you're using almost like software, right, within the camera to get to a lower one. So I keep it right at 200. I just do the native. So very simple.
You also brought up a good point, and I've read in my manual for my camera that if you do use a tripod, you should turn the stabilization feature off. And I've had, I don't say an argument, but a back and forth with some photographers that say they keep that vibration reduction on, even with using a tripod, but it should be off.
Yeah, theoretically, I mean, the manufacturer will tell you to turn it off. It's weird, Tim, because they've gotten so good now that I've had my pro shooters tell people don't worry about it because they don't bother turning it off. I mean, it's that good now. But I've had a couple of times where, excuse me, this microphone makes my nose itch. I've had a couple of times where I've had an image that's a little bit out of focus because of that. It's searching for movement. Now, if you're shooting something where you're on, like, say, a monopod or a gimbal or something where you're moving a little bit with the tripod, that's a little different because you want the stabilizer on because you're moving. But when you want to be stable and you're using that tripod to keep you stable, if you remember, I would shut it off. For sure. A couple people asking questions in the chat. Let's see. So how is the ISO quality? I guess you're probably, the high ISO quality. So Vicky, you're probably talking about the Olympus cameras there specifically. It just depends. You got to remember that you're not going to get the high ISO on a 4/3 of a larger sensor, right? That's just physics. But the newer sensors are actually very good. The grain, the noise, I call it grain because I'm still film. The noise is very close. It almost looks like a film grain. So it's much easier, especially with the new software that's out there from Topaz and even Lightroom. That's what I use. It's much easier to remove noise. There's tricks. There's ways to shoot as well. Some guys will expose to the right, which means they're taking their, depending on what they're shooting, if they're doing weddings or something, they might take their exposure more, blow it out a little bit. And then in editing software, they take it back down because your noise lives in your shadows, right? So there's different ways to shoot. There's different ways to get around it. Most people that I talk to nowadays aren't as worried about it. There's times when you want more, lower noise, especially when I talk about birds, right? When you're getting towards dusk or really early in the morning and you might go, oh, I wish I just had a little bit more. But I think we'll see some changes coming too. You look at some of the technology, it's been kind of stale the last few years. But look at the new, like, for instance, the new Nikon Z9. Look at some of the new processing that's out there, some of the new sensor technology. So I think we'll see things turn a corner soon where you'll see a lot of that get better and better and better. And the cool thing about it is the system's so small that that's one of the last hurdles we have. So hopefully we'll be able to tackle that a little bit. So as far as a difference between F8 to F16, it sort of depends. I mean, I don't get up into the 16 range too much, but you just got to play a little bit, right? You got to play and see where you're at. Some people talk about things like diffraction and stuff with the lenses. To be honest, I push my cameras if I need to, and I don't worry about that stuff. I just don't get too technical with my cameras. But I'm also printing a lot, and so I'm not as worried about things like noise. Also when you print, a lot of that goes away, and a lot of it gives the printer something to work with when they're printing, when you have a little bit of noise there, a little bit of grain to work with. So it really depends on what we're doing with our images, to be honest. Let's see. Vicky's asking, does Olympus perform well in low light? How does it perform in high ISO 32 to 64? if I was doing a birding presentation, you'd see some images in 64. It depends. Again, if you have light, it's fine. If you don't have light, then you're going to see noise in the shadows. But that's with any camera. So you probably got to shoot the camera to see. It's pretty interesting. You'd be pretty surprised, I would say, from what you hear and what you see when you actually shoot the system. It's actually very, very good. So I have a couple images. I have an image of a hawk in a dark wooded area with rain coming down. He had just eaten a red squirrel. I had a bunch of customers with us, and I had one of my friends from American Birding, and we watched this thing in front of us just tear apart this squirrel. I know that sounds terrible, but it was really interesting to watch that. And so we didn't have great shots because we're behind and we're trying not to bother it. But I have a shot of the hawk turning around, coming to the end of the log, and it's a decent shot. It's not a great shot, but I love it because it reminds me of the time and what we did. But it's 6400 ISO. It's a dark wooded area with rain coming down, and it doesn't look like it's dark. I mean, it looks pretty darn good. I just used Lightroom. I didn't use Topaz, didn't use any of that stuff. So again, that was 2 years ago. Even now, the processing has gotten better. So, is there noise at certain times? Of course. And is it full frame noise? Of course not. That's, it's a different category of camera, but you'd be very surprised what you can get with the cameras, for sure. Olympus changes to different company. How does this change effects? Okay, so I could talk about that. Yeah, so I work for OM Digital Solutions now. That's the company. So to be quick about what happened and sort of explain it a little easier, because it happens in business all the time, but in our industry, we don't see it as much. So electronics, cameras, the past few years aren't really doing as well, right? So Olympus is a medical company, and a lot of people don't know that. They've been making medical equipment for 100 years, microscopes, cameras for about 86, 87 years, somewhere in that range. The last 3 years, you have voice recorders and cameras that aren't really hitting the numbers, and we have investors, right? So it's business. So they wanted to remove the camera and the voice recorder business. So that's the reasoning there. So what we did is we created a new company, a new corporation. That's OM Digital Solutions. And as of January 1st, we split off from the company. Now, Olympus owns 5%. We still talk. We still share certain things. The company that purchased us purchased everything. So they purchased the sales, the marketing. They purchased the R&D. They purchased the engineers. They purchased the factories. It's the same stuff, same people, same everything, same heart of Olympus. Just a little bit less people in America, a little bit less people in Asia, a little bit less people in the UK, but it's the same people. So as far as the camera development and the cameras, you'll see a lot of future stuff. You've seen lenses starting to come out that are amazing. It's just that we have a lot more freedom, to move now. We're not under a big corporation now. We have our own voice and our own way to move forward. So now, as far as a name change, we announced about a week and a half ago that we will come out as now OM System. That's our brand. And if many of you know Olympus, back in the 70s, 80s, there was OM System, which constitutes that it's a whole system of products. So we have all the names. We've purchased all the names. So Tough, Zuiko, OMD, Penn, we purchased all those names, but we licensed Olympus because it is already a corporation. And so OM System will be the brand going forward, and you'll see a blend of those two names for a while because we have use of the Olympus name for a while, so a long time. So that's kind of like where we're going. So I'm actually very excited. It's been a great change so far because, again, I think we're able to bring our customers some really great stuff and quicker than we could before. And so it's been actually very good. So yeah, so it doesn't really affect anybody except me, but yeah, absolutely, Vicky. One of the key things I think is a lot of people know that Olympus is a medical company and a lot of people don't know. And so I think it confused a lot of people. Plus it was in the middle of COVID when the whole thing happened. And so there wasn't any voices out there to really, kind of explain things. But yeah, everything's great. Anything else, you guys?
One thing, Mike, I know you have
Yeah.
focus stacking and it's important
Yes.
for landscape photographers to get everything sharp,
Mhm.
front and rear. But do you use Topaz Sharpen any after you do your focus stacking?
So I'll be honest with you, Tim, I don't do a lot of the stacking and bracketing myself. I've done a little bit of it just to show people and stuff, but that's one of the features I don't personally use a lot in my photos. Um, I don't, I don't. In the photos that I've taken, I don't use the sharpening at all.
Do you
My
use
editing
Topaz
is
sharpening?
no, my editing is in Lightroom. I don't do a lot of editing. I do a little bit to my photos. I don't really, shame on me. Because the last 20 years I had so much opportunity to take Adobe classes and stuff at all the events I used to go to, and then as the industry shrunk, those all went away, right? I could have been a Photoshop expert, but I use Lightroom, and I just do a few things with my images, and that's about it. So I'd like to do more. I'd like to learn more about some of the post processing, but I don't use the sharpening in Topaz or anything like that. So, and you'd be surprised what comes out of the camera in those focus stacking and bracketing features. Now the way focus stacking works is it actually spits out a JPEG. It gives you, if you're shooting raw, it'll give you up to 15 images in raw, and then give you the final one in a JPEG with a little bit of a crop. And the reason for that is it's processing the final image in the camera. So it's giving you the color, it's trimming a little bit and cropping, it's putting it all together. So it gives you a JPEG, but you still have the raw files that you can do on your own in a program. And then bracketing is just bracketing. So that'll just give you all your, raws, but you could do up to 999 in the camera. So you have a lot more leeway with bracketing, and just, playing with the aperture and the amount of images you can shoot. It's pretty cool. It's cool to have it in the camera for sure.
One other question from me, and I'll shut up.
Yeah, it's
You
okay.
mentioned photo pills, which I've been using for years. It's a fabulous product. And in photo pills, though, you can calculate or actually have it show your depth of field, where the point is to shoot, instead of
Yeah.
shooting 1/3 into the scene. So do you use photo pills to calculate where you should take that shot?
So
Focus shot.
I just started using photo pills a few months ago. My buddy Todd, I mentioned in the beginning, in upstate New York, he uses it religiously. And so he talked me into getting it. And I was starting to do a little more with night shooting and stuff, just dabbling in it a little bit. So it's a great app for all that. What I've used it for is really just more focal length, just to see,
Yeah,
you can
yeah.
actually view the focal length in it. I love that. Just to see, if I'm looking at a waterfall, let's say, I can kind of see what 20 millimeters looks like, or 100 millimeters. So I've been using the basics of photo pills for that. But yeah, you can calculate a whole bunch of stuff. So and I've seen him use it for all that stuff, and it works really, really well.
Yeah.
So yeah, great app. It's like $10 for the app, you guys, and it's one of those apps where I'd recommend spending the $10. It's worth it, for sure. What do we got? Let's see. Oh, Vicky, can I talk a little bit about the camera models? Basic, intermediate. Okay, so that's actually pretty easy with Olympus. I never thought I would say this because it wasn't like this, but with all the changes in the industry with mirrorless and everything, we're like the only company with one mount now, for now. So it's easy to explain the differences in the camera model. So in my line, you have three different camera models, right? You have the EM10 series, the EM5 series, and the EM1 series, for the OMD. And one thing I'm going to explain is the naming, because it's huge, right? OMD, EM, blah, blah, blah. The reasoning for that is OM was our OM camera, right? Olympus Mitani. It was named after our designer. So OMD is OM digital. They kept the OM. And then EM is the E was our 4/3 DSLR. So EM is E mirrorless. They kind of kept that whole naming in there for some reason. But M10 is our entry level, and that's going to have contrast autofocus. It's 121 points. I mean, it's accurate, but it's contrast. It's a small camera, what have you. The EM53 is a sweet spot. It's polycarbonate, so it's lightweight. It kind of goes to the epitome of 4/3. It's small. You can take it on a trip, come home, and shoot birds. It has phase detection autofocus on top of the contrast, 121 points, all crosshair. So it's accurate and fast. The speed, frames per second, things like that, aren't as fast as my 1 series, which is my Pro series, but it's just about as fast. You know, 6.5 frames a second with autofocus, continuous, as opposed to 10 mechanical in my 1 series. So pretty darn quick. So that's a great little camera. The 1 series, there's the EM1 Mark III and there's the EM1X, and those are two just fantastic cameras for sports, birds, nature, outdoors, wildlife, macro, that kind of thing, like anything outdoors. They're very rugged cameras, and they're very fast and accurate at this point. So the EM5 series and the EM1 series are weather resistant. The entry EM10 is not. It still has great features. It has your aperture and shutter speed dials, just like my other cameras. So it's very cool camera to start with. But the EM5 and ones are going to be weather resistant, just like all the Pro lenses and some of the other lenses are weather resistant. EM1 is going to be magnesium alloy, so you're much better build quality. You're also very fast. It'll do up to 60 frames a second. That's one focus. You focus once, boom, you burst through it in electronic. If you want to continuously autofocus like I do with birds and things, then 18 frames a second electronic or 10 mechanical, which is what I use because that's plenty fast. And they have crazy features, but those are not to get into all the features and stuff. I would say that the one is definitely the one I recommend for things like birds, things like if you're going to bang it around with landscape. The EM13 is cool because it's there's no grip. You can buy a grip for it, but it's nice and compact, got a great ergonomic feel to it. That's something that Olympus has done very well, is the ergonomics. It has some great modes, dual card slots, all that stuff. The 1X is sort of its own little beast. When it came out, a lot of people were like, what is that? It's huge. It's our camera that has the built-in grip, right? But the camera was designed to use a long lens all the time. It's designed for birders, for sport shooters. It has buttons that are in the right spot. The placement is perfect. So if you're the kind of shooter that's constantly putting a grip on your camera to use long lenses to shoot birds, let's say, then that's a great camera for you. It's reliable. You're not going to have to take a grip on and off all the time. 2 batteries, heat pipe, all that stuff. But the 1.3 is like, that's one of my, I have the 1X that I own, but the 1.3 I shoot probably a lot more. Because I can add a grip, I could take it out. For landscape, I use the 1.3 because it's smaller, and I get a lot of use out of it. You also have some really cool long exposure modes in all of our cameras. So if you're doing star trails or light painting or things like that, just as a quick example, imagine shooting star trails and watching them on the back of your screen for up to 3 hours or 6 hours on the EM13. You actually watch them happening and then you stop the camera when you're done, so you can watch your long exposures take place. It's pretty cool, and that's some of the computational stuff we play with. So again, your cameras are all tools, right? And for us, it's playing with computational features that allow you to be creative, small, compact, lightweight, and rugged, and that's really where we stand. So pretty cool. A lot of people now are buying our 150 to 400, which is really hard to get right now. It's been back ordered forever. It's mostly handmade, but it's a $7,500 lens. But what we're finding is that other than Olympus shooters, a lot of people are buying it with the EM1X as their birding kit to travel with, because it's smaller and lighter, and they can come home and shoot their full frame cameras for their portraits and all that. And then when they want to go traveling, they'll just throw that in a kit, take it on a plane, go to Africa and shoot animals all day long. So it's pretty cool. It's just another tool, but I love the EM13. So that's my favorite. Hope that answered the question. I didn't go too far off on a tangent. All right.
Okay, Mike.
I think that's it.
That kind of sums it up for tonight. Very, very interesting discussion here. I know I enjoyed it. And I do shoot landscapes as well as, wildlife and other things, as most of the people do. Not only one subject, but like you said, shoot what you like to shoot. And I think you'll come out ahead.
Absolutely. I think that, we've had a lot of great technology, and we'll see more. And I don't know if I should say this, but I'll say it. But we've marketed for the last, say 5 years, so much about technology. And we really need to remember that this is photography. This is about having fun and shooting, and not worrying about everybody's gear. Just go out and have a good time and enjoy it. And I will tell you guys that the last 5 years, the more I've shot, the better my images have got. And it's just practice, practice, practice. You know, it's just learning your tool and getting out there and enjoying it. You know, enjoy the outdoors, and you'll get it for sure.
Okay, very good. Looks like it's 8 o'clock. We did good. So thank everybody for participating. Whatever, one of y'all go out and look for a barn, a little bit of water, and shoot, and practice. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate your time.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me, you guys. I appreciate
All
it.
right. Thanks everybody for participating. Bye-bye.